So, what do Sharpedo from Pokemon and, well, I guess all of these different cards, we may not actually be able to do a normal intro for this particular episode. How's it going, guys? I'm an avid herpetologist. Welcome to a special Shark Week episode of Animals in Gaming. This episode isn't going to be open to the usual way, since the influence of sharks on pop culture is so far-reaching, it would simply be impossible to try to cover it all in just a single video. Instead, we'll be taking some time to talk about some of the more interesting entries and covering some things that you may not have known about these infamous apex predators. To begin, what exactly is a shark? When most people hear the word, many minds are trained to immediately conjure a few images. Big teeth, large, menacing bodies, and usually one of a small handful of shark species, most commonly the great white. However, there are more than 500 known species of shark, and while the enormous, fear-inducing image of the great white may be the most famous, the average shark is only about 4 feet in length. Sharks come in an insane variety of sizes and shapes, sporting some of the most unique designs and adaptations to be found in the ocean. To the original question, what makes a shark a shark? All sharks are species of fish, featuring such simple features as gills to breathe water, and bodies featuring fins to help them move around in the water. Sharks are a subsection of the fish family known as cartilaginous fish. As the name suggests, the members of this family have skeletons composed almost entirely out of cartilage. This is the same material that our noses and earlobes are made out of. This group encompasses not just sharks, but rays, skates, and sawfish as well. Despite the great white shark's fearsome reputation, it's actually not the largest shark to be found in the ocean. That honor instead belongs to the whale shark, clocking in at an impressive average size of 61 feet. The award for the smallest shark species belongs to the dwarf lantern shark, with a maximum known length of only 8 inches, small enough to fit inside the palm of the hand. In these two species alone, you get a good feeling for just how insanely diverse this fish family really is, a far cry from the bloodthirsty reputation they've accumulated over the years. In fact, it may blow your mind to hear that some sharks aren't even exclusively meat eaters. Recent studies accumulated over the last decade have revealed the shocking revelation that some species of shark, in particular the bonnethead, a small species of hammerhead, can actually consume vegetation for nourishment, technically making them omnivores. Even amongst strictly carnivorous species, not all sharks are created equally. Shark diets vary widely between species, and there are often clues you can use to help you guess what a given species may feed on. Sharks are masters of adaptation, with unique body structures and senses to help each species survive in its given niche. One of the most obvious indicators of a shark's diet are its teeth. To dispel another common myth about sharks, not all sharks have long, jagged teeth like the great white. Different shark species have adapted to feed on different food items, and as such require different tools for the job. So let's take a look at the most famous species as an excellent example. Great whites, thanks to their immense size, have a diet largely consisting of fish and pinnipeds, such as seals and sea lions. These prey sources have a thick coat of fat on the outside of their bodies to keep them warm in the cold waters they can be found in. In order to help cut through this protective layer, great whites have teeth with serrated edges, similar to a saw blade. However, let's take a look at the nurse shark. This shark prefers to spend much of its time resting on the ocean floor. To help it survive this more sedentary lifestyle, the nurse shark has adapted teeth that are much smaller and more blunted. Now, you might be thinking, well, what good are these teeth going to be? Well, think about it. If you spend all of your time on the ocean floor, you're going to want to find food that lives down there with you. And what animals can be found on the ocean floor? Crabs, lobsters, snails, clams, and oysters. And what do all of these animals have in common? That's right, a hard outer shell. Think of a great white's teeth like dinner knives, specially adapted to help carve through their food, while nurse sharks have teeth more like nutcrackers. These shorter, blunter teeth let the shark crack open those hard outer shells to get to the tasty bits on the inside. Even what many might consider generic sharks have teeth specially adapted to suit a purpose. Think of species like the blacktip reef shark, blue shark, and oceanic white-tip shark. All species with a very stereotypical torpedo-shaped body, average size, and standard fish diet. Many of these sharks have similar teeth, being the presumed long, thin, pointed shape that many associate with shark teeth. Think of these teeth as being like forks. Sharks lack hands the way that we have to help us eat our food, so instead, they have to hold and catch their prey exclusively with their mouths. Large, pointed teeth help grab hold of slippery fish and give the shark an opportunity to catch food that could otherwise elude them. Differences between species certainly don't end there. Did you know most sharks have to move constantly in order to stay alive? In order for a shark to breathe, it needs to constantly be moving forward so that water can pass over its gills and provide oxygen. But wait a second, let's revisit that nurse shark again. Nurse sharks, along with several other shark species, such as zebra sharks and carpet sharks, spend much of their time resting on the bottom. Well, you see how they seem to be gasping for air while they rest? Well, that's because they sort of are. Sharks that rest on the ocean floor have specially adapted muscles that allow them to manually pump water over their gills, another awesome adaptation to help them survive in their preferred lifestyle. So, how exactly does this relate to gaming? Well, as you can probably imagine, sharks appear in virtually every form of media imaginable. For the sake of simplicity and my sanity, today we're going to be looking at two of my usual subjects, Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh! Pokemon has a few standout shark members, with Sharpedo in Generation 3, of course, being the most obvious. Sharpedo is definitely a promotion of Shark's harmful reputation, being listed as the brutal Pokemon in the Pokédex. Many of its Pokédex entries mention its ferocious disposition and willingness to attack anything around it. However, while it may not be immediately obvious, this Pokemon also demonstrates many real-life shark features. One of the first to discuss comes from its Pokédex entry in Pokemon Ruby, stating that its cruel fangs grow back almost immediately. Believe it or not, this is actually true to life. Shark teeth are very shallow-rooted, meaning that unlike human teeth, they're actually designed to fall out constantly. This is why when you go to the beach, it's not uncommon to find discarded shark teeth wash up in the surf. If you look at a shark's jawbone, you'll find rows and rows of teeth. As teeth fall out, new teeth will slowly push forward in order to take their place. Some sharks can even lose as many as 35,000 teeth in their lifetime. Sharpedo's Pokédex entries in Sword and Ultra Moon make a reference to its sense of smell. Have you ever heard the rumor that sharks can smell a drop of blood from miles away? Well, there is some truth to that. While it's not quite as simple as drop of blood equals shark coming your way, sharks have an absolutely astounding sense of smell. Their noses are capable of picking up the chemical composition of blood in ratios as small as 1 drop in an Olympic-sized swimming pool. Many of Sharpedo's Pokédex entries mention it having a top speed of 75 miles per hour. Now this is actually much faster than the fastest shark in the ocean, the mako shark, which boasts an impressive but inferior top speed of around 50 miles per hour or 72 kilometers per hour. Sharpedo also introduced a unique ability into the Pokemon games called Rough Skin. This mechanic would harm the opponent if it ever made physical contact.
So this is Sharpedo's rough skin, huh? It feels kind of like sandpaper.
A shark's skin is often referred to as being comprised of dermal denticles, which translates to skin teeth. While these denticles look like scales, they're closer in composition to modified teeth, being covered in enamel. Were you to touch a shark, brushing from head to tail would result in a texture very similar to sandpaper, while brushing from tail to head could actually result in you cutting your hand if you aren't careful. All of this combined is, honestly, a lot of pretty on-point references to be used for a single Pokemon. Fun fact, in the Pokemon franchise, the Rough Skin ability is kept almost exclusively to shark-themed Pokemon, with the only outlier being Druddigon, boasting some pretty obvious dragon inspiration. While not quite as faithful of a reference, there is another shark reference in the Pokemon franchise found in the Garchomp evolutionary line. Garchomp and its line are not water types, instead being ground dragon hybrids. The lore around the Pokemon isn't very related to sharks, but their designs absolutely are, with its first stage Gible even being classified as the land shark Pokemon. The entire line does share some interesting similarities, in particular to hammerhead sharks. Hammerheads are definitely one of the most recognizable shark species, thanks in no small part to their bizarre facial structures. Because their eyes are located out on the ends of its bizarre hammer, called a cephalofoil, they have access to 360 degrees of vision. Additionally, hammerheads have another sense shared by all sharks in the form of small, electroreceptive pores on their heads, which can detect the electric impulses given off by living organisms. These pores are called ampullae of Lorenzini, and in simpler terms are basically like a built-in radar dish that helps sharks detect the presence of other animals, even those that might not be visible. By spreading these pores out over the larger surface of the hammerhead's face, these senses are heightened even further, letting the hammerhead sweep the seabed looking for buried crabs, shellfish, and even stingrays. There's another distinct feature of the Garchomp line that actually lets you tell apart the male and female of the species, a notch in the dorsal fin. The notches in the dorsal fin are present on Sharpedo as well, and is another common trope of shark portrayal in popular media. A shark's dorsal fin serves the incredibly important role of helping steady the animal as it cuts through the water, and giving them balance as they swerve and roll to catch prey. Now, do real sharks have these notches? Yes and no. While these big, distinct notches are not very common, normal wear and tear on a shark's fin can cause each shark's dorsal fin to look very unique from other individuals of its species. Fun fact, sharks actually have two dorsal fins, one near the front of the back, the other usually situated down towards the tail. And the size of these fins can actually give you some insight into the lifestyle of that shark. Some shark species, like the nurse shark and sand tiger shark, are very slow moving, and to tip you off to that information, you'll notice both fins on their back are very close in size. For other, faster moving sharks, however, you'll notice a very tall front dorsal fin and a much smaller back fin. Okay, now moving on to Yu-Gi-Oh! Yu-Gi-Oh! In recent years has released support for what is commonly referred to as simply the shark archetype. While not all members of the archetype are actually sharks, there are plenty of members that do draw inspiration from some pretty cool species, so we're going to cover 5 of the more unique ones with real-world counterparts. To begin with, we have the card Saber Shark. While this card might look completely outlandish, it features an exaggerated depiction of the goblin shark. We can tell not only by the extended snout, but if you look at the shape of the jaws, goblin sharks have a pretty distinct shape that's very difficult to mistake. Goblin sharks are certainly one of the most bizarre sharks to be found in the ocean, with pink skin, distended features, and a jaw capable of protruding out of its mouth in order to help catch prey. The long snout of the goblin shark is thought to serve a similar purpose to the hammerhead, being covered in plenty of ampullae of Lorenzini, which can help it locate potential prey in the deep ocean, where these rare sharks are known to live. Next, we have the card Lantern Shark, named and designed after a subspecies I already mentioned earlier in the video, the lantern sharks. Lantern sharks are a member of the shark family known as squaliforms, with 4 extant members of the lantern shark family being recognized. While the dwarf lantern shark is the smallest shark ever discovered, all 4 members are small in nature, with the largest of the group only reaching a size of 90 centimeters in length. All lantern sharks have light-producing photophores all over their bodies, allowing them to bioilluminate, the term used when an animal is able to create its own light and glow in the dark. The lantern sharks are another species of deep-dwelling sharks, living so deep in the ocean that alternative sources of light are extremely valuable for purposes of communication and attracting prey. Next on our list is buzzsaw shark. Now this one might be a bit creepy, so prepare yourself ahead of time. Buzzsaw shark, or cutter shark in Japan, is based on a cookie cutter shark. Another easily recognizable design thanks to the extremely rounded head and the long, thin, almost minnow-like body. The cookie cutter shark is another member of the squaliform family, sharing its long, thin body with the lantern sharks. What makes cookie cutter sharks so unique is their grotesque method of feeding. Their jaws are small but powerful, with serrated teeth creating an almost perfect circle. By latching themselves to their target, closing their gills, and retracting their tongues, they can create a suction seal on their intended prey. The shark then uses its upper jaw as an anchor, while twisting and turning its lower jaw to slice out a consumable piece of meat. The wounds left by cookie cutter sharks can average 2 inches across and 2.8 inches deep. While this unusual and nightmare-inducing feeding method is what they're certainly most famous for, cookie cutter sharks can also consume live prey, such as squids and other cephalopods. Our fourth entry is Silent Wabi, for certain a much more colorful entry than our last. Silent Wabi in the Japanese format is simply called Silent Wabagong, the name of the shark family this card was designed after. Wabagongs are a group of sharks with a funny name to describe some truly funny-looking fish. Wabagongs are a species of carpet shark, flat ambush predators that look more like decorative rugs than true sharks. Much like nurse sharks, Wabagongs have specially developed muscles called spiracles that help pump water over their gills, allowing them to lay completely motionless on the ocean floor. Unlike nurse sharks, however, these incredible fish use camouflage to blend in with the ocean floor, with their most distinctive family feature of course being their dermal lobes, a series of barbels around their mouth made to resemble seagrasses. These fleshy mustaches are designed to draw in prey like small reef fish who might attempt to feed on them, only to quickly be snapped up by the lightning-fast reflexes of the Wabagong. The last card I wanted to discuss is Friller Rabka. While this misshapen fish monster may not look like something that would live in the real world, its design is based off of the living fossil known as the frilled shark. These guys get their name from the fringe-like gills that surround their throats, and feature a crude, primitive design that has barely changed in the fossil record since the time of the dinosaurs. These fish practice what's known as diel vertical migration, where they spend much of the day near the ocean floor and migrate up towards the surface at night to feed on fish and cephalopods. Moving more like an eel than a traditional shark, these bizarre fish will undulate through the water and lunge at prey, snagging them in a mouth containing around 300 oddly triple-pointed teeth, holding onto them like Velcro. Frilled sharks are believed to have the longest gestation period of any living vertebrate animal, with pregnancies potentially lasting upwards of 3.5 years. And since this barely even scratches the surface of the mind-bending diversity of shark species, here are a few of my personal favorites that I couldn't quite think of a good tie-in for, but definitely wanted to take the time to mention. Thresher sharks. This species has an incredibly long tail fin, which can be functionally used as a whip to stun prey. Basking sharks, the second largest living shark species, able to reach average lengths of 26 feet. Much like the whale shark, these guys are filter feeders who slowly meander along the surface with their mouths wide open, swallowing plankton. Megamouth sharks, a shark not even discovered until 1976, with only around 100 specimens ever being found. These sharks are easily recognizable thanks to their immense heads and large rubbery lips, and are the third and final filter-feeding planktivores of the shark species. Epaulet sharks, able to crawl across dry land in order to reach other bodies of water by scooting on their specially developed fins. And guys, that is barely scratching the surface. Sharks are awesome, there's no other way to put it. The insane diversity and adaptations of these incredible animals make them one of the most fascinating families in the entire animal kingdom. Unfortunately, the mythology around these animals is often accepted by people as cold, hard fact. I'm talking, of course, about their reputations as cold-blooded, merciless, ever-hungry killing machines. The oceans as a whole can be a source of fear for a lot of people. It contains a world so completely different from our own, with some of the most outlandish and alien organisms being found within. This fear culminates when people think about sharks, one of the largest and most commonly seen predators that the ocean has to offer. While fear of sharks has been around for generations, it came to a head in 1975, with the release of one of the most famous movies of all time, Jaws. Jaws fundamentally altered the public perception of sharks, and since its release, we've seen a barrage of various movie titles featuring large, killer sharks as the movie's primary antagonist. Everything that made Jaws an incredible film, unfortunately, also triggered in a very serious way all of the present fears people had about this misunderstood species. The movie's producer, Steven Spielberg, has actually been pretty vocal about his regrets around the movie. There's no denying that in the wake of this franchise's craze, shark populations world over began seeing a drastic decline, as sports fishermen flocked to the oceans with a newfound lack of remorse to hunt and kill the so-called man-eaters. While these fishermen certainly had an impact on shark populations, in reality, the biggest problem facing the animals was public opinion. I've discussed fishing methods and bycatch in my coelacanth episode, and both of these problems began to escalate with newfound prejudice. Peter Benchley, the author of the original Jaws novel, actually expressed similar sentiments to Spielberg, deeply regretting the impact that he had both on shark conservation and on public perceptions. Quote from Benchley, "What I now know, that wasn't known when I wrote Jaws, is that there is no such thing as a rogue shark which develops a taste for human flesh. No one appreciates how vulnerable they are to destruction." Sharks face a diverse range of conservation threats even in the modern day. A now largely banned practice called shark finning once decimated shark population, and this horrific practice is even referenced in the Pokédex entry for Sharpedo in Pokemon Moon. Quote, "It has a sad history. In the past, its dorsal fin was a treasured foodstuff, so this Pokemon became a victim of overfishing." However, there is some good news for sharks. Shark fin soup and the practice of removing a shark's fins, ultimately killing the animal, are now banned practices in many parts of the world. Additionally, for all of the bad to have come to sharks as a result of Jaws and movies like it, the popularity of the franchise also spurred on a great deal of scientific research. In fact, if not for the shark craze, it's unlikely we'd have Shark Week to look forward to every year, even if the programming may not quite be what it once was. Sharks used to be a dangerous mystery to us, but in the wake of Jaws, we've seen an explosion of interest in shark research, with a lot of populations making incredible comebacks, which is a very awesome thing to see. So let's take some time to talk about some of these specific myths that have been plaguing sharks for years. Number 1, sharks are man-eaters. As I've already mentioned, sharks tend to be incredibly picky eaters. However, there do exist, of course, recorded attacks on people. Generally speaking, shark attacks on people are a case of mistaken identity. And a big reason for how it happens has to do with the fact that sharks are, honestly, pretty lazy. Not just sharks, but predators as a whole. Predators by nature have to hunt down their food, which means in order to eat, they need to burn energy. That means that for a predator, the most advantageous meal is the meal that's easiest to catch. So, if given the option, do you think a great white would prefer a young, healthy seal or a sick, injured, or dying seal? And ask yourself, when we as humans enter into the shark's domain and flounder about aimlessly in the water, what do we look like to a shark? A healthy seal or a sick and dying seal? This leads me to point 2. Sharks are always on the hunt for food. Sharks are actually extremely efficient with the food they eat. The digestive tract of your average shark is a tightly wound coil. What this means is that as food passes through, first of all, it's going to take much longer to get through to the other side. During this extended process, the shark can extract every ounce of nutrient from it. As a result, many shark species only need to eat a single meal every 2 to 3 days, with some species able to fast for even longer periods of time. Number 3, the likelihood of a shark attack. I'm sure everyone at some point in their lives has heard the statistics about shark attacks. To summarize them, they're not just rare, they are exponentially rare. To put it into perspective, in 2018, sharks were responsible for the deaths of 5 people. By comparison, we as humans were responsible for the death of a tragic 100 million sharks worldwide. If you still aren't convinced about how unlikely it is you'll be attacked by a shark, here's a list of things that, statistically, on a yearly basis, you are more likely to die from than a shark attack. So hopefully this makes the point for you. Sharks are indeed a fearsome apex predator and are absolutely deserving of our respect, but they are so far removed from the mindless killing machines that we paint them out to be. By targeting weak members of their prey populations, they actually help weed out disease and keep the rest of those populations nice, healthy, and strong. Animals at the top of the food chain have the job of keeping herbivore populations in check. Too many herbivores can mean too much competition and pressure on the plants of the ecosystem. Those plants then start to die off, and suddenly the herbivore populations start to die off. It's an incredibly vicious cycle. Predators like sharks may not always be the most popular with us, but there is still plenty we don't know about the lives of these mighty fish. So what can you do to help? Well, the good news is, you have already started. Educating ourselves can be one of the most important tools available to us, and helping to dispel the harmful myths surrounding these animals is one of the best ways to help change public perceptions. Shark Week originally debuted on July 17, 1988, returning annually to become a cultural phenomenon. Originally, the program was firmly dedicated to shark conservation and fighting the same myths I've been discussing in this video. Unfortunately, educational programming apparently wasn't good enough, and in most recent years, what has historically been a program I always looked forward to has even begun dipping its toes into myths of its own, featuring the now infamous mockumentary in 2013, Megalodon, the Monster Shark Lives. The special is framed as being real, claiming to be showing real evidence, and as absurd as the program was to people familiar with the field of ichthyology, a lot of people actually believed it. Now you're creating fear of the unknown in people who believe what you have told them. In this case, the fake unknown, which is where a lot of the problems that sharks have faced all began. In my opinion, mockumentaries were a huge misstep for Shark Week, and I really wish Discovery would return to segments that actually provided interesting and helpful information about sharks. So to do my part, here's a list of 7 things you can do to help you avoid contact with sharks in the ocean. Tip number 1, stay in shallow waters. While some sharks do make appearances at public beaches, it's probably a given that the more shallow the water is, larger predators probably won't be around. Try when possible to stay in water that's shallow enough to stand in, and try to avoid venturing out into open waters, especially if it involves a steep drop-off where many shark species are known to look for food. Number 2, stay with a buddy. As we've talked about already, sharks prefer easy prey. You are far less likely to encounter a shark if you're in a group, so make sure you are always swimming in pairs. Number 3, avoid swimming during conditions when sharks are more likely to be active. Now this can include certain times of day, like dawn and dusk, when sharks are more likely to be feeding, but can also include certain areas that sharks are more likely to frequent. The shark bite capital of the world is actually here in Florida, at a beach called New Smyrna. The reason that this beach claims the title actually has to do with this particular channel right here. The narrow mouth of the channel creates a literal food funnel for hopeful predators. As tides change, prey fish enter and exit through this narrow gap, which means easy food for sharks. Try to be mindful of and avoid areas where sharks are more likely to be looking for food. Number 4, try to avoid wearing bright or shiny jewelry while swimming in the ocean. This is a tip not only to help you keep track of your valuables, but many predatory species, including sharks, barracudas, and eels, can be attracted to bright or shiny flashy things because it could look like a fish. If you're planning on going to the beach and swimming, my suggestion is leave your necklaces, watches, and rings all at home. Number 5, try to avoid heavy splashing. We've already talked about sharks looking for potentially easy prey items, so while playing in the water can be a lot of fun, just try to be mindful of your surroundings and avoid doing any excessive splashing or flailing around. Number 6, don't intentionally mess with sharks. Now, this should be common sense, but if you see a shark, leave it alone. This is especially important information for people who are really interested in diving or snorkeling. Even animals that want nothing to do with us can be provoked into lashing out if they feel threatened or cornered. So if you see a shark, keep your distance from it, even if it's only resting on the bottom. And finally, number 7, be aware of your surroundings. There are actually plenty of indicators that can let you know whether potential predators could be in the area. Be aware if the area you're in is common for local fishermen, who could attract sharks by dumping chum or discarded bits of fish. And while dolphins may not pose the same threat to people as sharks, Remember that they do feed on a lot of the same food items, so if you notice that there's a lot of dolphins in the area, stay alert. Lastly, just be cognizant of the area that you're in. You can check online or even ask a local lifeguard to see if there have been recent shark sightings. Remember that when we visit the beach, we are visiting their home. So please, be respectful and stay safe out there, guys. Thank you all so much for joining me for this special episode of Animals and Gaming, covering one of my favorite animals of all time. If you guys have any other questions you'd love to have me answer, feel free to leave those down in the comments below. I'll get to them as best I can. If you guys like this kind of content, feel free to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss my next upload. With that, I am an avid herpetologist. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and I will see you all next time.